Hi, conference. I've got my phone in case Amber Rudd phones. It is fantastic to be back here in York, although a wee bit eerie for me. You see, the last time I was here was 2 years ago, and I stood on this very stage talking to probably most of the same people about nuclear weapons. And the next thing I did was go back to Edinburgh and get selected to run in the general election. So a lot of things have changed since then. My face wasn't on a mug then. And there's a lot more we want to change. Some of it is about the party. Most of it is about the country. And then there's Brexit, but let's not bring the mood down too soon. On a personal level, I've been focusing on 3 things: asylum seekers, the Department for Work and Pensions, and the thing I've actually had most fun with, I think, since I was elected, the pink tax. I even got in vogue, would you believe? Who would have put money on that 2 years ago? But that's meant taking multinational corporations to task for thinking it's okay to charge women and girls more for everything from disposable razors and deodorants to clothes. And over the next few weeks, I'll be lining up meetings with some of the biggest manufacturers and retailers to persuade them that they really want to act now. They really want to fix the pink tax themselves. They've seen what we did with the gender pay gap, and well, if they don't fix the pink tax, I'll just set Joe Swinson on them. That'll teach them. I didn't think the last time I was here I'd be fighting big corporations, so that's different. But fortunately, York's the same, and it is a fantastic place. I was going to make a joke here about Vikings, or maybe Rowntree's fruit pastels, because I do love them. But I thought, you know, it's quite strange for us, as Liberal Democrats, to be holding our conference so close to Theresa May's spiritual home, and the area from which her government is undoubtedly drawing its inspiration, the shambles. Well, actually, I think I'm being too kind to the government and a bit unfair on York. York deserves a better comparison than this government. It's a fantastic city and has given us some wonderful people: Dame Judi Dench, Sir Vince Cable, and Joseph Rowntree. And I'm not talking about the pastels this time. You see, like Vince, and I hope most of us, Rowntree was a fierce champion of social reform. In the late 1800s, when he was building his fortune in what was then a largely Dickensian Victorian society, he actually looked after his workforce. They had free education, healthcare, and pensions. They were doing better than this government. Here was a man who embodied that true British value, a liberal British value, of looking out for the less fortunate than yourselves. Theresa May and her government really could do with taking a leaf out of his book. And there's one particular shambles of theirs that I'm now determined to work on: the Department of Work and Pensions. It's difficult to know where to start. The department which those who are most in need most. It's there to help us through the toughest of times. And most of us will have those times when what we need is an official shoulder for comfort. But the reality is the Department for Work isn't working. Take the assessments for personal independence payments, for example. They are not fit for purpose. And the benefits freeze. It's been described as the biggest cause of poverty in modern Britain. That is an outrage. And as for universal credit, universal credit is a universal failure. And the most annoying thing is that it might have worked. It might actually have simplified things, got people into work, if the Tories hadn't dipped into the pot and siphoned off £3 billion. Yes, in 2015, as soon as we weren't there anymore, looking over their shoulder, checking their work, they started fiddling about with the figures. Oh, they'll say that Phil Hammond put back half of the money. Yes, half of the money. It needs so much more than that. But there is one Secretary of State who appears to be taking note. Fortunately, It's Amber Rudd, and credit where credit's due, she has at least acknowledged that universal credit has contributed to the astonishing and distressing growth in the use of food banks in this country. But you know what? I've lost count of which working pension secretary she is in 8 years, because this lot can't even make their own departments work. None of them have gotten to grips with the problems in the system: late payments, budgeting problems, compounding the stress for those who are already suffering, and creating rent arrears and contributing to putting more people out onto the streets. You know, every Monday when I arrive in Parliament, or when I go home at night, I walk past people sleeping rough at the entrance to Parliament. Not so very long ago, one of them died there, in the doorway of the Mother of Parliaments, in the 5th largest economy in the world. Someone died of poverty. Oh, I know the Tories will say DWP has a quarter of all spending, and that's the scale of the challenge we face, but as members of Parliament, or actually just as people who give a damn, we have a duty to be careful with our language and how we talk about the system, to be sure that the story we tell about poverty isn't one that blames the victims, that we accept responsibility for people who are homeless, and we don't somehow make it sound like it's their own fault, that we recognise that the whole point of DWP is to help people out of poverty, to support them into work, and to provide them with security in their old age. But, Conference, that's not what current government policy and actions reflect. No. The 5-week waiting time for universal credit payments just reinforces the feeling amongst claimants that actually the state doesn't want to help them. What they see is a delaying tactic. In my constituency of Edinburgh West, we only got universal credit at the end of November, and we're just beginning to see the impact of it, and we don't like it. Sometimes it seems like it's just another problem for people to cope with, and believe me, they have plenty of them already. And there are thousands of people out there who are looking to us to fight their corner. People like my constituent who came to me because she'd been told in a PIP assessment that she was no longer entitled to the Motability card that she has had for years. No, they said, she didn't need it, because if she could drive, there's no logic to this, if she could drive, well, she could obviously walk. So she didn't need the Motability card. They didn't seem to realise that the car was specially adapted, specifically because of the disability she was born with that affects her legs, makes it difficult to walk. Well, we fought her corner, raised her case with ministers in Parliament, and eventually, thankfully, she was told she could keep her car. No, correct that, she could keep her lifeline. But now, the same department seems to think that her disability will somehow miraculously end. So they've put an end date on how long she can claim for. Amazing powers they have in DWP these days. Time and time again we see it. They can end disability with the stroke of a pen. Well, no, they can't. But here's a suggestion that might work. And it may be a wee bit radical, certainly for them. Instead of wasting money on an assessment system that isn't fit for purpose, handing over millions to private companies to make ludicrous decisions like that one, that then get turned over in expensive appeals because the majority of them do, making decisions that deny people the help they so obviously deserve, invest that same money in people. Bring the assessments in-house, make sure the budget is spent where it's meant to be, on helping people. But perhaps the most important thing this government could do to invest in people is end the benefits freeze. Like I said, it's the biggest single driver of poverty in this country. Could be the biggest single challenge, but it could also be the single easiest thing to change. Next month, it goes into its final year. Stopping it, that would have cost money, £1.4 billion. And the really galling thing about that is that the government had it. but decided to spend that money on giving tax cuts to the highest earners. Now, how does that decision happen? Who is it who sits down and decides to help those who need it least, rather than the people who could benefit most? Conference, it is not now, and never could be, morally justifiable to balance the books of the country on the backs of society's most vulnerable. And if you're thinking I take this a little too personally, you would be right. You see, I've had quite a lucky life. I know people look at me and they see a middle-aged, middle-class, professional woman who's relatively comfortable. But that's where I entered. That's not where I started. For my first decade and a half, my family lived in rented accommodation in Clydebank, in the heart of shipbuilding country, just as the industry was sinking. My dad didn't work in it, but my mum did, part-time to make ends meet. And eventually, she paid a very heavy price for that. My mum's name is on a shiny stainless steel memorial across the road from where the shipyard used to stand, a memorial to the victims of asbestos poisoning. So as an aside, please today go and take part in the air pollution debate. My sisters and I, growing up with my mum and dad, were provided for that comfortable, happy working class life. But two things happened in those years, which much later shaped where I stand right now. First, my dad was made redundant. Thankfully, he was able to get another job, and at the time, my sisters and I didn't really notice any difference. But now I see all too clearly that there were sacrifices my parents made, corners that were cut, and I'm in awe of how they coped without missing a beat. And I'm in awe of those facing the same situation today. And you see, by then, they had 3 girls. And every time I think about the 2-child benefit cap, I think of those days, what it might have meant for us. Supposing my mum and dad hadn't been able to make ends meet, he hadn't got that job, the government would only have worried about 2 of us. You see, the Tories love to tell us that they are the defenders of the family. But this immoral, punitive, and discriminatory cap shows otherwise. It's the thing that reveals, for me, their true colours. And even if you do buy into their argument that, oh, well, you should be able to afford a 3rd or 4th child before you think about having one, well, things change. Life is uncertain, and your financial situation can be flipped upside down in a heartbeat, just like it did for us. So what do we say to those people? Your child will have to suffer because you've run into some bad luck? From Thatcher to May, we see it time and time again. Families are not safe under the Conservatives. Actually, there was another thing that happened to my family that shaped that. When I was older, I was about 20, and when my sisters were just 13 and 8, my dad died. By then, my parents had bought their own house and moved out of Clydebank, but overnight, we went from being that increasingly comfortable, aspirational family that Margaret Thatcher so loved, to being a single-parent family. And that's the other place where my admiration for my mum and every other parent who finds themselves in that position comes from. Well, technically, I'm a single parent myself now, but I've never had to cope with worrying how I would feed my girl, how I would keep us warm, and how I could make sure I had the money to pay for the roof above our heads. I look at other single mothers who aren't as lucky as me, and I know I owe it to them to make this government recognise the support they deserve for their children. Because without it, how on earth will we ensure that the next generation get the chance to fulfil their potential, to live the lives that we have led? We are already in the unacceptable situation where 2/3 of the children living in poverty in this country come from a household where at least one parent is working. That's not just unacceptable, that's failure. A failure by government to look after those who need its help most. A failure by government to give our children the best start in life. A failure to protect the welfare state and those who depend on it. Now, we have a responsibility as Liberals. Those failures by this Tory government undermine the drive towards a fairer society that this party, our party, the Liberal Party, has always held as its most cherished, most defining principle. It's 100 years ago that Lloyd George originally began to lay the foundations that were to grow into Beveridge's vision of a welfare state. So today, I want to make a special plea to Amber Rudd, always assuming she's still in the job. In the short time she's been there, yes, there's been a step change at DWP, but not a big enough one. While the Secretary of State acknowledges the problems, that's not enough. Amber, you need to fix it. Stop all those who are finding ways to reduce payments, making it difficult to claim, or not recognising that poverty can affect those in work too. Fix it. Stop the freeze, abandon the two-child benefit cap and help families caught in that ridiculous trap. They find work, but childcare is too expensive to allow that job to actually transform their lives. Take these families out of poverty. I wish some of our other colleagues were acknowledging the problems. I went to see one of them last week, the Home Secretary. Oh, he's open to ideas about asylum seeker. He's keeping an open mind. It's not his mind I want open. It's doors, employment. Why will they not acknowledge the skills and talent that asylum seekers bring to this country and allow them to work? Why is it that instead of valuing people who have taken the enormously courageous step of fleeing persecutions, leaving behind everything, why do we rob them of the one thing they have left? Their dignity. Instead of helping them to work, because many of them have got skills that we need in our health service, in education, in our industries. They have valuable skills. They want to contribute, to feel valued. No, we push them to the margins, living on a pittance of a £5 a day. I wonder how many of us, I wonder how many of the Cabinet could live on a £5 a day. Conference, these are the things that I got into politics to change. And I know you did too. And if we're going to do these things, we need big change in the party and in the country. But it's not going to happen on its own. And if we are going to drive it now, the way the Liberals did 100 years ago, we need help. We need other people to join us. We need to grow. We need to encourage people to support our movement. Vince said last night there's 250,000 people out there support us. We need them to help us in the way that is best for them. And we need to work with anyone, in Parliament or out, who yearns for the progressive change that we know that this country needs. If we do that, then maybe, just maybe, we'll get that pink tax outlawed. Joe won't have to step in. We'll get the ban lifted on asylum seekers working and feeling valued. We'll end the benefit freeze, stop the immoral cap on benefits for children, and introduce a better way to help people dependent on disability payments without robbing them of their dignity. Maybe then we can restore some humanity to a system we were once so rightly proud of. And maybe, just maybe, this generation of Liberals will finish the job that previous ones started. We can stop the Tories dismantling that fairer society, the welfare state, those generations worked so hard to build. We can reject the politics of this rudderless, morally indefensible shambles of a government. Conference, we demand better. We demand better than this. We demand better than what the Tories have to offer. We demand a Liberal future. Thank you.